Wow. All right, you guys, happy new moon in Cancer. I'm so excited to have Maya here, and Jessica's also here. So thanks so much for coming. I wanted to just kind of get started and talk a little bit about what this new moon is bringing us, like what energies we'll be feeling, and then Maya's going to help kind of walk us through how we can implement some positive changes in our life. So this new moon is happening in Cancer, which to me is like setting out a new emotional foundation. So I feel like a lot of us have one area of our life right now that is probably stagnating, that probably needs to be cut off or needs a refresh or some form of liberation that is going to help us have more fulfillment in life and just kind of like a reset emotionally. And so that's really what I'm seeing this new moon focusing on, especially with the sextile to Uranus. I feel like it's promoting that liberation, it's promoting that change, and it's asking us to finally do something about it. And I do feel like we could be a little bit frustrated at this time, given the other things that are going on in the sky. We have Venus and Mars being conjunct, and this basically can create a lot of intense desires for things. Not always the case, but a lot of times we will want more connection with other people. We will want more money or even more like indulgence in things like enjoying the pleasures of life. I mean, it's summer, people are out, people are drinking, they're hanging out. Like there's just more of a focus on that. However, these planets are also opposing Saturn. So there could be a little bit of frustration. Like, oh, we want to do these things, we want to pursue these things, but there are delays, there are blockages, there are frustrations or responsibilities and effort that we need to put into things that are preventing us from just diving head first into things in the way that we would like. So those are some things that we might be feeling right now. And I feel like those blockages are coming up so that we do take the time to make some shifts in our life to create that new emotional foundation. And then from that place, we can start to manifest those desires from a really healthy, strong, and independent place. So I feel like this new moon is really great for a reset. That's kind of the feeling that I'm getting. And because it's a new moon, we probably won't see everything playing out right now. This is normally something that is felt really potently in the first 2 weeks and then manifests itself over the course of the next 6 months when the next full moon in Cancer occurs. So I do feel like in 6 months from now, we're going to feel really different. Once we've cut out some things that aren't working, once we've let go of some things from the past, especially because this moon is making a square to Chiron, there can be things from our childhood, from past lives, that are holding us back in a way or that feel painful and like we don't quite want to address them and let them go. That's what the square is. But the sextile to Uranus is giving us that more positive support in helping us make those changes and helping us let that go, even if it's uncomfortable. So I was hoping, Maya, we could talk a little bit about Cancer energy, which is about how to nurture ourselves, about how to create that new emotional foundation for ourselves, and how to do it through change. And kind of like what you typically see with clients when it comes to change, like people changing too much or people changing not enough or the resistance to change. And yeah, like all the emotional roadblocks that kind of stand between you and your new life.
Yeah, change is such a huge topic because change is like what's necessary for us to evolve, right? Like we have to allow change to come into our life. We have to be okay with change if we want to evolve. And evolution of our soul is one of the main reasons that we like chose to come into this human body. And so when we resist change, we really resist the reason that our souls chose to come here, and it wreaks havoc in our lives and we stay stuck anyways. And so I'll go into why we do that. There's a few reasons why we do this. So let me just think about where I want to start with this. Okay, so humans are really, like, you hear this all the time, like creatures of habit. And we really get comfortable in what's familiar. And if we break down the word familiar, this is interesting. And I don't know if all of us have thought about this. Maybe it's something that everyone thinks about, but that word really is about family. So familiar, when things feel familiar, it's because it feels like home. It feels like where we come from. And so a lot of the patterns that we find ourselves in our life, like including the ones that don't serve us, we stay in those because they feel very familiar. They remind us of home. And it's really difficult for us to get ourselves out of things that feel really comfortable. And, you know, something that I tell all of my clients, and this is something that's so important to remember, is that a lot of times we're resistant to change because we fear the pain that we're going to feel on the other side of it. Whether a lot of times when we go through a big change or we let go of something, there's grief on the other side. Like we have to grieve letting go of a relationship or moving or anything. We have to grieve, or there's pain involved in letting go and in change. And people are so scared of that pain that they stay stuck in these patterns and these situations that aren't serving them. But something that's so important to remember is the pain that we're so scared of feeling, we're already in. So the pain that we're feeling by not eliciting the change, not moving toward change, is the same pain that we're scared of feeling on the other side. But the difference is that if we make the change and we move to the other side, we get to lead ourselves to a place of moving through the pain and having it be resolved. Whereas if we don't create the change, we stay in the pain and there's just no end to it. We keep looping through it. And so it's just important to recognize that change is actually what leads us to like resolution of the pain that we're already in. And people are really scared of the emotion of grief. But I find grief to be a very sacred emotion, because when we're grieving, it means that we've just gone through something that has been a huge change. And change, again, is what leads to evolution. And so it's kind of this like backwards positive thing or sacred thing that we can look at it as.
Can I just add something to that?
Yes.
So I love when people tell stories. So I kind of wanted to add like my personal experience with what's going on. So I just moved into a house that I purchased. And I always thought that I would never purchase a house because I'm pretty mobile. I've been moving at least every 2 years and traveling a lot. And I've really identified as kind of like a gypsy person, internally, not externally. And I think I thought, you know, that moving into a house, like I was like, okay, I want to evolve. I want to become this Courtney 2.0. I want to become this person. And I think in order to do that, part of that, what my soul feels called to do is start to create more foundation, more roots somewhere so that I can build something substantial. And so it felt really like the right direction. And in my mind, since I'm the person who leans more on the side of too much change than too little change, I think what I do is I look at the change as something that's going to make me happy. Like I'm like, okay, once I get there, once I'm over there, then my life is going to be perfect. Like once I'm living in a house, I'm not going to have any of these issues. And really what I did was just moved into the house and realized I'm still the same person. And I also had a ton of anxiety about like leaving this past behind or becoming more stable. Like went to the gym and I drove home and I started having the thought, I'm going to take this same route like 1,000 times. Like I'm going to just know this whole entire area. It just gave me this feeling of like being stuck. And it gave me an immense amount of anxiety because it's just something that to me is a lot of change. Like stability is a lot of change for my personality. And so I think that that's something to add to it as well, as like, I think I didn't realize how much I would be grieving my former self of like, oh, I lived in this area and I felt really young and I was walking around downtown and just having drinks and now I'm moving to like a family area and it's like much more calm and like suburban and yeah, there's like a huge grieving process that I didn't really fit into this image of what was to come next. And but I also feel like you said, it's so sacred to be moving through that instead of like trying to maintain what was, because I loved it. Like I also love this. It's like I love both and it's so hard. to let one go for the other?
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that. I love the personal stories because it gives people a context, but also it just brought up like three really important points for me to talk about. Okay, so the first point is this. So actually my partner came up with this term and it's brilliant. He came up with this term that's called the self-created image. And something that humans do is our ego attaches to identities. And we attach to these identities because we see them as cool or they inspire us, or there's so many reasons why we attach to an identity. Someone told us this is what was cool. Someone showed us this is who we should be, right? So we attach to these identities and we put a lot of like effort and energy into making these identities very like secure in us. So if we're talking about being a gypsy and a nomad, I can highly relate to that. And it's like it becomes part of your identity. You become attached to it. And something that's really hard about being a human is if we want to evolve, we have to take a really deep look at our self-created images and ask ourselves, is this truly authentic? Number one, or have I grown out of it? Like maybe it was authentic at some point and maybe it's not anymore. Maybe it's not serving me. And one of the hardest things for humans to do is to admit to themselves that that created image is no longer authentic or no longer serving them, and to move away from it. There's so much grief there because they've put time, energy, money, they've put it out there. People know them as this. It's so hard to disidentify with something that we've identified with. And there's so much liberation in doing that when we can just like say, okay, like this is old version of Maya. Let me step into this new version of Maya and let that be exciting as well as going through the grief. So that's the first thing that came to mind, the self-created image. And so if you want, you can start to, maybe this is a good time for it with the Cancer new moon, is like starting to look at your life and ask yourself, like, is there something I'm doing that is a self-created image that actually I don't feel connected to anymore, but I'm just so scared to let go of? It can even be the way you dress, like anything, you know? I was just telling Courtney that for 7 years, I was like platinum blonde. And just one day, it like, 2 years ago, it hit me and I was like, wow, this is a self-created image at this point. It wasn't when I had done it. And I don't fully identify with this anymore. And it was an actual grieving process to go 2 years of like growing it out and becoming brunette again. So it can be these like surface things too. So that's the first thing. The second thing that was coming up for me is, oh, I lost it. Hold on, let me go back. Okay. So I wrote this out, and I'm actually going to read it so that I can like really fully explain what I'm trying to talk about. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but it's important. So I'm going to read this. So I had this download one day and it's all about change. And so this is what I wrote. Humans do this weird thing where we have to make something bad in order to give ourselves permission to make a change or move on. I see this so much when people want to leave relationships or want to leave their job or want to move somewhere else. We find every reason why the person or place is bad to justify our decision to make a change. Why do we need to convince ourselves that something is bad in order to find the motivation to move forward, to choose something different? How empowering and light would it feel to not make something bad, but to love it for the role it played in your life and simultaneously own that it is simply no longer for you? To own the fact that you have the power and the trust to make a change that is more in alignment. When we make changes and decisions with grace like this, we take our power back and we get to enter the next chapter without carrying the energy of resentment or avoidance in our bodies, but instead with openness and groundedness. The energy behind your decisions for change will without a doubt affect the experience you're moving toward. And I think that this is so important because as humans, what we do is we find a reason to dislike the thing we're trying to leave or make it bad so that we can feel okay with our decision to change. But it's so much more liberating to say, thank you. I love this part of my life. I loved this relationship for this reason, and it's no longer for me. And trust that when you make that decision, something better is on the other side.
I just wanted to add as well. I think one of the biggest things, and I don't know if I mentioned this in our last call, one of the biggest things that someone said that has like really sat with me since is asking yourself if you're making decisions out of fear or love. And I feel like what you mentioned, saying the energy behind your change or your decision impacts it. And I just totally agree, because I feel like there are times in our life where we feel cornered by ourselves emotionally to make a decision, and it's usually out of fear. And it's like those are always the decisions that you don't want to make. And that oftentimes is like the decision to not change, to stay in that relationship because you have a fear that you're not going to find someone better, or to stay in that place because you have a fear you're not going to find that next dream job or the next dream home. And whatever is familiar is safe, and you at least know what you're going to get. You at least know you can handle or deal with those problems. So yeah, I feel like the emotion behind it is so huge. So I'm so glad that you said that.
It's so huge. And just to like add to that is like something that's so important for us to know is that we are in constant communication with God, source, the universe, whatever feels good for you to call it. And what we give our energy to, we're communicating to God. I like to use God. We're communicating to God that we want more of that. And whatever we don't do or whatever we say no to, we're communicating that, okay, that's not what we want. So when we're giving our energy to things that aren't serving us any longer, or when we're staying in things that aren't serving us, or when we're saying yes to things that aren't in our best interest for growth, we're communicating to the universe or God that we want more of that this is where we're at, that this is what we feel worthy of. And we're just going to stay stuck and get more of that and more of that. Whereas people are so scared of change because also like we're scared of the unknown. We're scared of what lies on the other side. And so we don't say no to things that aren't for us because we're scared of the unknown. But what we have to really remember is we're the director. So when we tell God no to something that's not serving us, we're actually telling him, hey, I'm ready for something more in alignment or something that I've been asking for and desiring. And so there's a lot of trust that has to be cultivated to move through change gracefully. Because God, the universe, like wants us to have all of our desires. But if we keep holding on to and keep saying yes to things that aren't in alignment, there's no space for God to give us that. And so it's like, I have this saying, and it's the unknown is where the magic lies. And I think maybe I'll read one more thing. I wasn't planning on reading these things, but this is like all things I've been journaling about a lot. And I think it's just like really important. So this is what I said, and I'd be curious, Courtney, to hear kind of like your thoughts on this. But okay, so the unknown is where the magic lies. The mind is so scared of what it doesn't have control over, what it can't predict. Oftentimes we stay stuck in a life that is not fulfilling or just mediocre because it is safe. Oftentimes we don't allow ourselves to dream and reach past the goals that seem logically achievable in order to minimize the potential of failure and pain. When we cling on to what we know or what we are certain we can achieve, we contract the space necessary for the magic to enter. Our minds are limited. They can't possibly fully dream up what is available to us if we let go, if we trust. The potential is actually limitless. When we allow ourselves to move toward the unknown with openness and curiosity, we create so much space for magic to enter. We create so much space for growth and expansion into versions of ourselves that we never thought possible. The thing is, God wants you to have the magic. You were meant to, you were born for it. And so moving toward it is fully supported. I decided that living a life void of the magic was way scarier than the unknown. I decided to pick up my fear, put it on my back, and say, I hear you, and we're going anyway, to dance in the unknown and to let the magic rain down on me. I desire the challenges. I desire the surprises. I desire the new, because the unknown is where the magic lies. I declared years ago that this life of mine will be nothing short of magnificent. and I'm in constant awe of what enters my life as a result. And I desire this for you too, because it's way more fun to go together. And so it's just like remembering this mantra of magic. The unknown is where the magic lies. And that's really what's allowed me to move through change with grace and excitement, actually.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, when you sit and you watch a movie that you've seen like 10 times, I mean, you can anticipate. It's just the feeling is not even remotely the same. Yes, you can enjoy it because it's familiar and it's good, but when you don't know what's coming, it's like you can find joy in that when it's in a movie. So can you find joy in that when it's in your life? And also, this new moon is making a trine to Neptune. I believe it's a trine. It's a positive aspect to Neptune. And initially, I was like, oh, this is a lot of support from the universe and compassion with ourselves. But really, what I think it is now that you're talking is us being able to trust that when we make these changes, that we will be supported and that we don't have to make that decision from fear. We don't have to feel like we're doing this alone. Because I think once you've made enough trust falls into the universe and changes, you start to see that you've always been supported. It always turns out okay. And then it gets easier over time to just kind of go for it. So I don't know. I love that so much.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And so I kind of want to talk about the other end of the spectrum, which is kind of what you mentioned about people who are kind of addicted to change. And then I want to answer some of Jessica's questions, or just respond to you, Jessica, after I talk about this. So people who are addicted to change, I can highly relate to this. And I think we vacillate too. Like people, like some things we're scared of the change, and some things we're just like, give me all of the change. But I also lean more toward I love change.
And you can see if you're that kind of person, if you have like your sun or your moon or even Mercury making an aspect, even Mars. I mean, pretty much any of the personal planets, like I would say mostly Mercury, Mars, Sun, and Moon, but especially the Sun and Moon, if they are making an aspect, especially a positive aspect or even a square with Uranus, you will definitely be someone who will tend towards change or towards leaving things or towards starting anew rather than trying to make something work or stick with the familiar.
And I think it's important to note that like this also comes from a place of fear. It's like what you said, like the fear of stability, for me, like the fear of staleness, of being stuck, really. And so, as you know, Courtney, like one of the modalities that I utilize with my clients comes from depth psychology, and actually the modality is called source code, and it comes from my amazing teacher and mentor, Sam Rader. And she's a psychologist from LA, and she developed this modality for healing, and it's absolutely brilliant. But part of this modality is looking at this modality is made up of looking at the things that didn't go well in our childhood. So there's certain developmental phases in our childhood, early childhood, that have to be nurtured properly by our parents in order for us to turn into fully healthy adults. And this never happens. Like, not all of these developmental phases get nurtured properly for anybody. And so when they don't get nurtured properly, what happens is that we adopt coping styles to cope with what is missing, the nurture that's missing. And so there's 12 developmental phases that have to be nurtured properly. So for each of these 12 developmental phases, there are a coping style that goes with each one. So it's kind of like a map. When we see someone utilizing one of these coping styles or having these coping styles as part of their personality, I can easily trace back to what stage didn't get nurtured correctly in their childhood. So that's just kind of a background. But one of these coping styles is called the frictive coping style. And Courtney, you and I talk about this one a lot because we both have it. And it's one that I've done a lot of work on. And it's really transformed my life working on this frictive coping style. But essentially what the frictive coping style is that these people who have it have to create friction in their life. They have to kind of like rub up against life in order to feel alive, in order to feel real. And what that looks like, it can come out in a lot of different ways, constantly eliciting change in their life, involving themselves in drama, going, doing, always on to the next podcast, the next teacher, the next adventure, the next, like, just there's this deep, deep fear of stillness, stability, calmness, and like blankness. And that fear actually comes from this wound that happened in the first 3 months of life. And so in the first 3 months of life, we really have to be super contained by our caregiver. So we have to be held like really closely to the chest, skin to skin, firmly. We need containment, because that's what teaches us that we are like alive and we're real and we're a person. And so when we don't get that containment, we start at 3 months old developing this existential fear that if we don't create friction to make us feel alive, we're going to fall away into nothing. If there's stillness, if there's blankness, we're going to die, we're going to fall away. And so people who are addicted to change typically have this frictive wound. And actually, the medicine for healing it is stillness. And so I think you and I, Courtney, are both kind of exploring that stillness and that stability now. And that's really what helps us come out of the frictive wound.
Yes, definitely. And I think I just wanted to add, this is personal to my chart. I have seen a few other charts like this. So it's like kind of like a specific example, but I think it's interesting to share anyway. So I have like Uranus conjunct my moon, and I was reading up about this like a year ago, and the astrologer was talking about how the moon is often representing our childhood experience, which makes a lot of sense that it also represents our emotional interior, because we're formed that way. So it can represent the mother, our just general childhood experience, and Uranus can represent like sudden unexpected change. And so having that on your moon can often show that there's some event or something that occurs during childhood that creates an immediate disruption, an unexpected disruption. And essentially what that does, she was saying, is it can create like inner volatility, because you kind of grow to expect that you can't trust stability, that the rug can be ripped out from you at any time. And that's exactly how I feel. I lost my dad really suddenly when I was 11. And so the idea of monotony and all of that I think is part of the frictive wound, but there's also an additional fear of, if I do find stability, I can't trust it. There's danger there. And so that can sometimes be like the shadow side of Uranus, is that we desire that change because of the frictive wound. But then if we do move towards stability, there can be fear that that's not safe either. That, besides falling away, like that you might get comfortable for a second and then it's going to be taken away. So I feel like there are lots of layers to that. And so it's like, I think it's so important to really have self-awareness around where the desire to change is coming from. Because if it is out of fear, like out of fear of monotony, then that's also negative. Like it's not going to be positive in your life necessarily.
Yeah, it's like, what's the intention really? Like what place is this coming from? And that's important no matter what we're doing in our life, is like really self-awareness, if we just want to make it more broad, is coming back to what place in my body is this coming from? Is this coming from a wounded place, or is this coming from a healed place that's actually in alignment? So that's a really important thing to always be looking at when you're making just any kinds of decisions in your life.
Definitely.
Yeah, I just want to look at what Jessica's saying, just so we can respond here. I'm just going to read this really quick.
Yeah, so Jessica, one of the things that she says is she has Uranus opposing Pluto. Can I share this, Jessica? Okay, Uranus opposing Pluto. Can that help explain why I'm feeling blocked? So yeah, when we're looking at Pluto in terms of our growth, this is actually one of the biggest planets in evolutionary astrology for our soul's evolution. So we look at the South Node to kind of explain who we were in a past life, but we also look at Pluto to kind of show where we have started to work on lessons. And it basically, I think, helps informs the South Node a little bit about what energy you've been living in the past and what lessons you've been starting to try to feel. So it has a lot to do with, like whenever we have a Pluto transit, it has a lot to do with that larger transformation of our soul. And so anything that's activating it can show, okay, why we feel blocked or why we're being called to make bigger transitions, bigger changes. And specifically, you have Uranus opposing Pluto, your natal Pluto. So I don't think Uranus opposing Pluto is making you feel blocked. I think it's the fact that Uranus is squaring Saturn, which means that Saturn is going to be squaring your Pluto. So Saturn squaring Pluto, what I've noticed during this time period is that people will feel all of their old habits come up and come back with vengeance, and it becomes really hard to break free from them. It gets so bad that it gives you like this feeling of like, I need a metamorphosis. Like it's just coming, it brings it all to a head. So you get so uncomfortable, so sick of yourself that you're ready for a change. And so that's probably why you're feeling that. And Uranus is actually going to help you create that change. So Uranus is going to be one of the outlets for that. And it's probably going to feel like in 2022, things are improving because that's when the Uranus Saturn square will end. And that's when you're finally going to have Uranus energy flow, where change is just moving through us easily. This year, Uranus and Saturn is squaring multiple times and it's hanging out around each other this whole entire year. So this whole year is us really wanting to make big changes, but not really being able to fully do so. We do so partially, we start to see a little bit of results, and then we kind of are back onto old habits, or we fall into this next thing that we need to make changes. And it's like the larger transformation that really wants to be seen isn't fully going to be implemented this year. It's really going to be next year when we start to see it. But since it's contacting your Pluto, Jessica, it can make this so much more intense for you. So if you have the Saturn square Uranus actually contacting a planet, it's like this whole entire year, you're going to feel this emphasis or this pressure of needing to make a change, but struggling to make that change. So if that's what you've been feeling, that is totally in line with what's going on. And if it's not hitting a personal planet, it probably won't feel as intense for you. You might feel like it more in the background. Everyone feels it a little bit. But if it's not hitting a personal planet, it's just not going to be as big of a deal. Maybe you don't have as many life changes to make at this moment.
Okay, so something that's coming up for me is so like I said before, like one of the purposes that we came into this life is for evolution, which means change, to evolve. And when we resist evolution, when we resist change and we hold on and we stay stuck, what the universe will start doing is making what we're holding on to really bad and painful so that we have to move on. So either if it, like, say it's a job, like we'll end up getting fired from the job, and it's gonna start to get more painful and more painful the longer we resist the change. You know, like maybe in a relationship, like it gets more tumultuous, or you end up getting cheated on, or you know, something that's more painful than it would have been had you just like made the change when it was time. And my other teacher, Teal Swan, calls this endurism, where it's like we're enduring something because we're like addicted to it, or we're stuck, or we're scared of the change. But endurism leads to more pain because the universe is going to do everything it can to get you to evolve. And so the more pain it causes, the more likely we are to go in the other direction. And we can even look at this in terms of like disease. Like a lot of times disease comes into our life to teach us that something has to change, something that we weren't willing to change on our own. It has to like show us. And so when things start to get really painful, we just have to recognize that there's a change that's probably needed. Pain is like an alarm system. And the other thing I wanted to say was that you talked about the butterfly for a second, and this is an important note, is like sometimes when we do make a change, I like to see it as like the caterpillar, the cocoon, and then the butterfly. And the cocoon is almost like this limbo state that we sometimes enter. And so if we think of like energy and the law of attraction, when we make a change, we're kind of like recalibrating our energy. And it takes a moment sometimes for us to start to attract the new and start to attract what's now a match to our new vibration. And so sometimes there's this period of like cocoon or limbo, and people get really scared in that place because it's like, oh, did I make the wrong decision? What am I doing? And so it's really important to recognize that like in this limbo and in this cocoon, you're just kind of recalibrating, and you're about to attract what is now a match to you. And that sometimes it doesn't happen right away. Sometimes it does. But that cocoon, that limbo is actually a better place to be than in the chaos of what needed to change.
And that's exactly what I was saying about this new moon in my email was this Cancer new moon, like we have Venus and Mars coming together to show us our strong desire of what we want, but then Saturn is blocking it. And it's because right now we are in that cocoon phase where we can see what we want, or we think we know what we want, but we're not ready. We're like still dissolving. We're still integrating. We're still resetting ourselves emotionally, letting things go from the past, and in that weird transition phase. And so if we called in the new right now, we wouldn't even have the emotional capacity to hold it. We wouldn't be able to fully like actually embody those changes because we're still moving through that transition. And so I feel like this is going to be a really important time to recognize where we're at in this cycle and not try to push and to be somewhere already. And I think that's a really big part of Cancer energy is recognizing the feminine and the cyclical nature of life and not trying to force things to be on a different timeline.
Yeah. So like, would you say like Cancer energy is very feminine? I mean, that's what I would say. Yeah. Yeah. And so we're in this period of really having to lean into our feminine, and in leaning into our feminine means slowing down, trusting, going into our intuition and our knowing, the flowiness, and like change is flowiness. It's moving, it's moving with the current rather than resisting the current.
Yeah, this is something that I've been going through right now with this change in my life. You know, I moved into the house and like my personality, I wouldn't say it's type A, but I have a lot of earth. So I start thinking ahead and I start planning and I want to have something tangible to grasp onto of like, this is what I want my future to be like. This is what I need to do. And I started feeling very overwhelmed by it. And I'm already anxious about just letting go of that past. And I'm too much in this transition that I realized I just need to take this one day at a time. Like, and I started asking myself, instead of trying to plan how to achieve this goal right now, I need to actually work on how I'm feeling to raise my vibration. And so I started to ask myself, whoa, what brings me fulfillment and what brings me happiness? And how can I do more of that? Whether it's related to work or to my free time or anything. And I feel like that's really what I'm trying to focus on and do right now. And then I feel like maybe in a few months, once I feel solid within myself and not questioning my entire life, then that's when I can start like actually implementing things and doing that more masculine, driven, ambitious kind of thing.
Yeah. And if we're talking about like cycles, you know, like if we're talking about the cycle of the woman, something that has helped me so much in my life is understanding the seasons of the cycle. So like we go through like 4 weeks of our cycle each month, and each week is a season. And I'll just review it just in case people don't know what I'm talking about. But essentially when we're bleeding, it's winter. We feel like hibernating, we feel inward, we feel like not social. It's not really a time to like create and like put ourselves out there. It's a time to go inward and process and dream. And so that's winter. when we come out of bleeding, it's spring, right? And so we're starting to get our energy back. We're starting, and then we go into summer where that's where we're like very social. We feel the best in our bodies. We feel like we want to be seen. We feel like we want to put out to the world what we've been like contemplating and creating. That's our time to like put our creations out to the world. And then before we bleed, the PMS phase, we kind of come back into fall where our energy starts to fall again and we start to go back into hibernation mode. So this cycle is really important with what we're talking about, because it's like with the butterfly analogy. So like with the caterpillar and the cocoon and the butterfly, it's like really honoring which phase of the cycle you're in and recognizing that once you become the butterfly, you're going to be the caterpillar again at some point. And this is just how life goes. And so it is very feminine energy when we look at change in this way, because it's really getting to know the cycles and being really clear and honest with yourself with which phase you're in and what that means for you, and kind of like relaxing into that phase because you can't change it.
Yeah. And I think I just kind of a little tangent is I definitely have started to recognize like when I'm in each phase. And then I get to the point where I'm in the butterfly phase and I start fearing the caterpillar phase. Because I'm like, oh no. I think it's like once you start feeling good, it's like the fear that it's going to get taken away or that you're going to reset. And it's like you're going to go back into that lower struggle.
So I'm really glad you said that. So it's so good for us to recognize that we can't really go backwards, right? We're not going backwards ever because you can't unknow what you know. So we're always growing, even when we're going back into the caterpillar phase. It's just a new level. And so something that's really helped me in my life is when I know that the caterpillar phase is coming eventually, it's like more gratitude for being in the butterfly phase, first of all. And second of all, creating kind of like, I wouldn't use the word excitement, but a curiosity for that caterpillar phase that's coming, because I know that it's another level up. And so instead of looking at it as a bad thing or a backtracking or like I'm back down, it's like, oh, here's my next level up. And the way I really like to like explain this is, life is always this. It's never this, never. And we have to get this out of our heads. And so when I'm in the down, which is the caterpillar phase, it's like, okay, here's where I'm learning the lesson. I'm in the middle of like learning a new lesson for my new level up. When I start like coming up from that down, it's like, okay, I'm integrating. That's like the cocoon. I'm integrating this lesson. And then you kind of reach the peak where, oh, I'm putting this lesson to use in my life. Like I'm embodying this lesson. And then there's going to be a new lesson and you go back into caterpillar phase. But instead of looking at it as bad or scary, it's like, can we look at that as like exciting, because we're constantly leveling ourselves up.
Yeah. And if exciting is too much of a jump, I feel like a good, or something that I realized with going through breakups was like, I can trust myself that I have the tools to get through this.
That's so important. Yep.
It makes it a lot easier to at least accept what's happening and not try to resist it as much. Cause I'm like, well, Courtney, like you got this, like you've done this 3 times before, the rules, like, it's going to suck and then it's going to start getting better, and like kind of what you can do and what you cannot do to feel your best in this difficult time.
I love that, because something that I often tell myself as well is like, if there's a change I'm scared of making, or if I'm going through something difficult, reminding myself I have all of the tools to move through this, like, and I have support, because, I at least, and I know for you, and like we've cultivated like people in our lives that are capable of supporting us through this. And if you don't have that, that's why like having a coach or having a therapist or just a community of women or anything, a community is so important, because it allows us to move through change with more grace, because we have that support and we know we have the tools to do it. We can trust ourselves.
Yes, definitely.
Such a good point.
Well, this has been an amazing talk. Is there anything that you want to add? Any personal anecdotes as well that maybe you've been going through, or just, any wisdom you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes with Cancer energy, but like it's about a lot of times when we're going into the fear of change or the fear of staying still, whatever it is, it's our little girl or our little boy, the child within us being scared. And this is really our opportunity to step into our mother archetype or into mothering our inner child. And it's like, I've got you. I know you're scared, validating that inner child, making sure she or he feels seen and held. But this is what's best for us, and we're gonna go anyways. It's kind of how in that when I read that thing, I said I put the fear on my back and like walked with it. And it's the same thing. It's like we have to hold our inner child through this change. She or he is gonna resist and kick and scream, and it's like, I've got you, and really bringing in that nurture energy to move through the change. That mother energy is so important. And I was sharing with Courtney before this call that I've been going through like a really huge letting go and a liberation period in my life with something that's been coming up. And something that's been really helping me is all of the things we've talked about, the trust, knowing I have the tools to move through it, but really mothering myself through it and giving my little girl the nurture and the love and the validation she needs as she processes what's been coming up, and utilizing all of my tools. So the mothering energy with this Cancer new moon is also really important. And I know, Courtney, you brought that up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes such a difference. And also to being able to trust yourself. If you are nurturing yourself like a child, you know that you have your own back. And that solidifies that trust so that when you do go through this process or this difficult time again, it feels like the trust is more solid. So it feels like you can lean into that more. And I remember after my last breakup, which was like maybe, I don't know, like a year and a half ago, um, it was pretty sudden. It was like kind of unexpected. And I just remember it was like the middle of the night. I was driving home because I was at his house. We broke up and I was driving back to my parents' house, just like bawling. And I just remember telling myself, like, Courtney, I love you so much. Like, I got you, you know, like I was just telling myself just how much I cared about myself. I was going to take care of myself. Like, I was like reassuring myself as if I were another person at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that moment you're losing someone else's love, but to feel like you have your own love and like that's enough to sustain you and like you're going to get through it. And I feel like anything, whatever we're going through, whether it's positive or negative, to have that kind of, to have your own back and have that nurturing energy is just so transformative. And it's from that you become strong. And the opposite sign of Cancer is Capricorn. It's like the Cancer is that, it's very that soft, nurturing, mothering energy. But then what does it produce? It produces that person who's able to go out into the world and ask for what they deserve and ask for what they want and have this ambition, this drive, and this ability to be seen and hold on to all these things because they have that like that solid foundation within themselves. And so I think that's why we're in this phase right now of creating that solid foundation so that in the next few months, especially in the fall, I feel like things are going to start coming in for us, more Capricorn energy, and we're going to be able to hold them.
Interesting, because my sun is Capricorn and my moon is Cancer, and so it's interesting to hear how they play together, and it makes sense why this is something that I just like love to teach people.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love
Thank
that.
you for that. Yeah, I think like this conversation is so important because change is just something that like we can't avoid in being human. And so if we have the tools and we have the different perspectives to look at it with, it's just so helpful. So I hope that whoever's watching, that like you're getting something out of this and that change just becomes a little bit more graceful for you, because it makes life feel a little bit easier when we can like approach change with grace.
Yes. I love that. Thank you so much, Maya. I really
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time.
You're so
And
welcome.
I hope that everyone has a good new moon.
Yes. Sending you all love.
Bye.